So what you're saying is that we need a Healthy Gamer OnlyFans? No. That's not what I'm saying at all. All right, maybe one day. I was thinking about the inundation of porn and graphic sexual content in today's culture. I was wondering what would be Dr. K's thoughts on how this is affecting the human mind and mental health. I feel that genuine human intimacy is going down in this day and age, but it could just be me. Sexuality is something so common and frequent to humans naturally, however, that it just seems natural that in the internet age it would be everywhere. However, I feel that, as I said, this is affecting human intimacy, and it, at least in my eyes, seems to be making sexuality and sexual experiences not as special or exciting as they should be. Just some thoughts from the community. Would love to hear people's ideas. Okay, let me think about this. Oh man, so I think this is such a complicated question. So the simplest questions actually have the most complicated answers because it depends on what level you want to talk about, okay? So if we want to try to understand the inundation of porn and sexuality and sexually explicit, not even sexually explicit, sexually implicit things on the internet, right? So if you look at things like the hot tub meta on Twitch, that's not sexually explicit, but sexually implicit. So we are absolutely being inundated and bombarded with sexual stimuli. And so the question is, what does that do to us? And the short answer is no one really knows, but I suspect it ain't great. So here's what we do know. If we look at content on the internet, what I have come to realize is that the content that does well is the stuff that from an evolutionary or sort of takes advantage of the evolution of our brains. So our brains have evolved to be attracted to particular things. And though that attraction in our brain led to survival benefits. So a good example of this is we're attracted to high calorie density food. So we're attracted to food that is sugary, fatty, delicious, right? We call it delicious. Food that is low calorie is not usually considered delicious. And so then what happens is our body has evolved to have a preference for this one thing because it used to be a survival advantage. And then we started making Twinkies, and then suddenly people are now dying of diabetes because their body has evolved to tell them to eat this unhealthy food. And what we have is we have industries that have adapted to this evolutionary preference, like fast food, right? So we have calorie-dense pizza, all this kind of stuff. I had pizza last night. It was delicious. I hadn't had pizza in a while. And I ate 1,000 calories. And so we have entire industries that have adapted to meet this need. And then what happens is the industries is sort of we're just making the pizza. We're not, people can choose to eat it or not eat it. It's we're just making pizza, right? And so there's personal freedom arguments and all that kind of stuff. But I think industries are adapting to fit the existing architecture of our brains. And I think this is essentially happening with the internet, dopamine, and sexuality. So, the last big revolution that was predatory on the way that our brains and bodies have evolved may have been the food industry. And now what we've got is this whole cognitive, technology, predatory kind of stuff. I don't think some of them are trying to be predatory. Some of them aren't trying to be predatory, right? So if you're a game designer, some of them are sitting there as CFO and trying to think how can we extract more juice from this sweet pudgy gamer. And then some people are how can I make the game that I want to play? How can I make a game that's more fun than anything I've ever played before? And so both of those things will end up with arguably things that will be predatory on our circuitry. And so I think we're seeing this in sexuality as well, where content, people are sort of figuring out Instagram is a good example, right? So everyone is editing Instagram photos. And I saw that there was recently legislation in Norway where you have to let people know that your Instagram is edited. And so what everyone is doing is they're gravitating towards these, people aren't really sure, they're not neuroscientists, but if I'm an Instagram model, I'm going to figure out from a Darwinian sense, right? I'm going to try this post and it's not going to work. I'm going to try this post. It is going to work. Oh, what did I do there? Oh, I was wearing something skimpier. Okay, now I'm going to try skimpy, but this is too skimpy. And now people think that I'm kind of like, hoish. So like people didn't like that as much. So I need to be like just hoish enough, right? So that's sort of like the idea behind like, and they figured this out. They figure out like how the brain is wired and what leads to the most kind of like pull. So some of the impacts that we're seeing are, we're seeing things like pornography addiction. So we're seeing that, for example, the more likely you are to get addicted to pornography, like depends on how early you were exposed to pornography and also the intensity of the pornography that you were exposed to. So we are seeing real like psychiatric consequences. We're also seeing, as this person suggests, like some confusion around intimacy and expectations. So a lot of people who, grow up watching porn will have particular expectations of what the appropriate response is. So I one time had a patient who told me that they were unable to have an orgasm when they masturbate. And as I talked to them, I realized like actually when they masturbate, they are having an orgasm. It's just in the pornography, there's like, so they used to say that I can get to the first part of orgasm. I was like, what do you mean the first part of orgasm? And they're like, well, I get like a small amount of ejaculate, but I don't get to the full ejaculate. I was like, what do you mean the full ejaculate? And then I realized that like when you watch pornography, there's such a copious amount of ejaculate that like this person had what I assumed to be like a normal ejaculation. I still remember I looked up like after an appointment, I looked up what is the average amount of what is the median amount of human ejaculate in milliliters. And so pornography had given them this idea that like orgasm is this like just explosion of like buckets of ejaculation. And they just didn't understand that, right? So like they would actually masturbate and they thought they were like busted in some way. So like, the impacts of pornography, is there pornography addiction? Absolutely. Is it affecting with intimacy? Like, I think so. And then there are all these other like unexpected outcomes that we're not going to know, right? Like you can't predict that if people watch a lot of pornography, like teenagers are going to get confused about when they have an orgasm. That's not like, you just can't make that prediction, but it's an effect. And so, what effect is it having? The short answer is like, we sort of don't know. So we're certainly seeing some of these things like, death grip syndrome and some of these other things where our brain is like wiring to expect a certain kind of stimulus. And then it takes some time for us to like rewire to like regular stimuli. And so, there are a couple of things like this, but the short answer is like, is it affecting us? Absolutely. And the reason that we don't know is because pornography and sexually explicit and implicit material is evolving so quickly that we can't even study it. Like we can't study it fast enough. So if you think about, 5 years ago, like OnlyFans didn't exist. But at least I don't think so. Maybe it did. But now what's happening is like, I'm sure that OnlyFans, the parasocial element of OnlyFans is going to create intimacy issues in real relationships. Because for a long time, partners have always been concerned about, what was I saying? Oh yeah, OnlyFans. So, partners for a long time have been concerned that like, oh, if my partner watches pornography, like it feels like they're cheating, right? Like partners have all like been concerned about, watching pornography and like, whatever. And then like, I think that there's an emotional component, there's a parasocial component on OnlyFans, which is going to exacerbate those kinds of feelings in the people who are vulnerable to them, right? So like it's completely possible that, the majority of the population or maybe the minority, I have no idea, will be totally fine with, someone donating $100 or purchasing, I guess, $100 or $1,000 of content a month on OnlyFans. Like some partners may be like comfortable with that, right? Because polyamory is also growing, like open relationships are growing, like everything's changing, so that could be fine. But at the same time, I think that like the reason that OnlyFans is successful is because pornography has evolved. And what people have figured out is that like there's an element to pornography that's purely physical. And it started off with a magazine, right? There's like zero interaction. And then like how much will it prey on our brain if I get like interaction with that woman? I can lust for a particular, I'm just sort of thinking about the heteronormative here and a masculine perspective. But you know, if I'm a man and I'm lusting for a woman, like looking at a Playboy magazine, like that's fine. But then suddenly like I'm able to interact with the woman, I'm able to get the woman's attention, like I'm able to like have more contact with her. And we just saw from a post earlier today that like, you know, people can get addicted to Twitch and stuff because of these parasocial interactions. So there's like you know, what effect is it having? Honestly, as a scientist, the right answer is I don't know, and no one does. And at the same time, we are clearly seeing signs of something is changing in our brains in the way that we interact with each other. Now, I'm not going to be quite as doomsday as many people will. Everyone's like, oh my God, the world is coming to the end. Like OnlyFans will be the death of all relationships. And I'm sure that someone out there believes that. But I also think that, you know, the reason we stream on Twitch is because we can sort of fight fire with fire, right? So like people can become addicted to Twitch, and people can hopefully watch Twitch, which I know sounds kind of weird, to like help themselves not become addicted to Twitch. It's bizarre. But I think that we can probably we can teach people how to have healthier conversations and relationships. I've done that before in terms of like, you know, pornography and OnlyFans and stuff like that. Like how can you communicate with your partner? Because that kind of communication education like hasn't been available for most of the history of humanity. So it's possible that we can just build healthy relationships despite all this stuff by just learning more about ourselves. So what you're saying is that we need a healthy gamer OnlyFans? No. That's not what I'm saying at all. Oh my God. All right, maybe one day. I'm happy on Twitch, chat. Can you... OnlyFans, man. Right, and so this is where like... Is this the same person that was asking, is this why Magneto is never depressed? Just to be clear, the world is changing. We don't know how it's changing. Is it causing problems? Probably, and or yes. And I don't think that means that the world should stop changing, right? So like the whole goal of humanity is that new challenges arise, and like as the human race, like we have to figure out how to like unscrew ourselves from all the screwing over we've done. So like, you know, the Industrial Revolution happened and we started like using fossil fuels a ton. And now there's like concerns around climate change. So we got to like fix that, right? So they're like reforestation projects and like, you know, all kinds of things that is the human race hopefully will, you know, start doing. And so that there's a cognitive revolution as well. There's like a cognitive change. There's like, you know, we're doing a lot of things that cognitively offer short-term benefits. And there's almost like a cognitive climate change happening right now with the human race. And I think the reason that we're seeing so much more mental illness and why mental illness is getting worse and suicide is getting a little bit worse, if not significantly worse, depression is increasing, anxiety is increasing. I think it's a sign of this cognitive climate change. So does pornography have something to do with that? Sure. Does OnlyFans have something to do with that? Sure. Does YouTube have something to do with that? Sure. Does Twitch have something to do with that? Sure. And are these things evil? Do we want to stop advancing as a human race and like stop advancing technology just because it has some downsides? I personally don't think so. I think this is where like we can learn about ourselves and we can manage it. I love video games. Yeah, so when VR develops haptic feedback, that is going to eliminate the human race. I gave a talk about this at a video game developer conference a few years ago. That my biggest concern about the pornography industry is when you can have haptic feedback with VR. And like then like literally people may stop having children. And then like you incorporate things like AI and stuff. Like, and you have like a fully virtual girlfriend that will throw temper tantrums and frustrate you. And then, yeah, AI waifu with haptic feedback, then it's like GG, dude. So, you know, there's this idea right now that like people who are into waifus are like less than human. You know, people will mock them a lot and will denigrate them a lot and things like that. But I think as technology improves, like just like gaming has become, we used to do that with the gamers. Remember that, chat? You remember when gamers used to be the minority? And before everyone was doing it, and then as games got better, everyone started doing it. The waifu revolution is coming, chat. Prepare yourselves.